my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is in partnership with Needed. There's overwhelming evidence that higher standards of nutrition support fertility, birth outcomes, and lifelong health. Unfortunately, the prenatal vitamin industry is failing us, leaving 95% of us depleted during one of the most nutritionally demanding times in our life. Most prenatal vitamins only provide bare minimum nutrition, while Needed goes beyond bare minimums with products that can meet the needs of our minds, bodies, and babies. I feel confident recommending Needed because their products are rigorously third-party tested and endorsed by over 15,000 women's health experts. Needed's prenatal multivitamin comes in two forms, capsules or a delicious vanilla powder. In addition to the prenatal multivitamin, Needed has created bundle options to meet your needs, not only during different stages of pregnancy, but also while trying to conceive and postpartum. As a mom of 3, I especially love their collagen, pre and probiotics, and cognitive support supplements. Head over to thisisneeded.com to find your perfect bundle. I've talked to so many Birth Hour listeners who have discovered Needed through the podcast, and I love hearing the feedback that they are feeling better during pregnancy since starting with Needed. Use code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your first order and up to 40% off monthly plans at thisisneeded.com. Since this discount applies to your first order only, I always recommend going with one of the plans for the best value. At the end of this episode, I talked to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about Needed's recent clinical study results and what makes their products really stand out, so stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another great way to be part of the Birth Hour community is by supporting us over on Patreon. So by pledging your support each month at the $5 a month level, you can get access to all of our archived episodes, so over 800 additional episodes not in the main podcast feed, as well as our private Facebook group that has such a great backlog of information. Just using that search bar, you can get almost any question answered, and you're going to find really supportive people there that are going to become your friends. And in addition to that, we do monthly Zoom calls. Just go over to patreon.com/Birth Hour and become a Patreon member and come see what it's all about. It's just $5 a month. You can get an even bigger discount. If you want to do an annual membership, you'll see that option there. And there's also an option to get it as a gift. So if you have a friend or a mother-in-law or somebody asking you what they can get you to help you prepare for baby, maybe you want a Birth Hour Patreon membership so that you can listen to more and more birth stories and find great community. So again, head over to patreon.com/Birth Hour to get started with that. Today's birth story guest is Justine. She's going to be sharing her experience with a transfer from a birth center to the hospital, as well as postpartum preeclampsia and dealing with postpartum depression. All right, let's hear from Justine. Hi, Justine. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Bryn. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about my story.
Awesome. Well, before we get to that, can you tell us just a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. My husband and I live in Phoenix. Our son is about to be 1 in a couple weeks, and we have been spending a lot of time recently outdoors because the weather's getting nice. And my background is in fine art and painting, and I've just set up a new studio. So I'm looking forward to getting back to being in the studio.
Very cool. All right. Well, start us off with finding out you were pregnant, getting pregnant, wherever you want to start.
Okay, great. Yeah. So my husband and I, we got engaged in 2022, and at the time was 32 and my husband was 40. So we discussed starting to try and thinking it could take up to a year if we're lucky. And we just kept it pretty low key. We weren't tracking ovulation or anything. We just thought, okay, we'll just try. And if it happens, great. So I wasn't always sure if I wanted to become a mom until I met my husband. I, was really focused on my painting, and I just really never felt like I met anyone who made me feel safe enough to dream of having a family. But my husband really expressed when he first started dating, he wanted to have children. And since he was a little bit older, he was ready to start trying. So I became pregnant in February 2023. And it was still kind of a surprise, even though we decided to start trying. And I was feeling really, really tired. But at the time I was teaching first grade. So I just thought I was feeling my exhaustion from teaching, and it was the weekend, and we went out to dinner with my in-laws, and I had a generous glass of red wine at dinner. So the next morning I was feeling just a little off, and my husband said, "Why don't you take a pregnancy test?" And so I had taken pregnancy tests before, but kind of just for fun. I never really thought I was pregnant, and I just thought, I don't think I'm pregnant, but I'm going to take one. And I looked at the pregnancy test and I almost just threw it in the trash can. I didn't even really look at it. And I saw the second really faint ink line. So it was still a surprise, as it usually is. And I went out and told my husband, and he was so happy, and we hugged, and his parents were coming over to meet us we were going to go to a bird sanctuary. They were in town and they were on their way over. So we had to keep this little secret that I was pregnant. We decided, we're going to wait till around 12 weeks to start telling our family. So that's how I became pregnant. I also was teaching during my first trimester, and it was so sweet because, I think children are so in tuned, and they would make little comments like, my name was Rivas at the time, Miss Rivas. They'd say, "Miss Rivas, you're eating so much food." And I was really hungry my first trimester, and eating was the only thing that kind of helped with the nausea. And so I would eat a lot at work. And then I actually started to gain weight really quickly during my first trimester. I think I gained 12 pounds my first trimester. And in hindsight, I think that's actually maybe a sign of preeclampsia. That may be an early symptom, early weight gain. So it was tough to be working in the first trimester. I found that the most difficult because you're just tired and nauseous, but it was also so sweet to be with my students. And when I eventually told them I was pregnant, they were just so excited. They just would run up and hug me and tell me I was going to be such a great mom because I was such a great teacher. And I would get lots of cards from them, and they would draw what they think the baby's going to look like. And I remember my class voted on picking the name for the baby, and they wanted to name the baby Patrick. So that was really cute that they chose a name for the baby. And my husband and I, around 8 weeks, we were looking on baby name websites, and we were just going through some names, and nothing really stuck. And my husband said, "What about the name Lou?" And we really liked the name. We both, "Oh, that sounds really nice with our last name." And so it just kind of stuck. We picked the name really early. And actually, one of my students ran up to me, and he said it was this little boy who I really loved his mom, and just a really special kid. And he ran up to me. He said, "What if you named your baby Lou?"
Crazy.
And I just was so shocked. And I said, where did you get that name? And he said, "Well, that's my dog's name."
Aw.
And so now he thinks that he named my baby Lou, or I've named my baby after his dog, which is super cute. And so I was looking for an OB, and I knew I probably wanted to go with like maybe a midwife and give birth at a hospital. And so I found a practice, and it was one of those like larger women's practices where there's a couple midwives and a few OBs, and it was fine. I had my early appointments with them, but it just didn't quite feel right. They didn't really remember me when I would come in. I'd see a different provider every time I'd come in, and I always felt like very anxious at the appointments. I never really felt that comfortable or calm, and it just felt like they were rushing in and out of the appointment. And so I remember some people telling me, you don't have to just go with your first provider. You can keep looking around. And my husband agreed. He said, I'm not really like feeling this place. So I got a recommendation for a midwife, and she owned a birth center from a parent from my school. And I went to the birth center, and of course I fell in love with the space and just the environment. And I felt very comfortable, and I loved the student midwife that I met with. And my husband is a doctor. And so he was very hesitant about me giving birth at a birth center. He had in medical school, he had seen a couple births, and he saw one with some complications. And so he was hesitant, but I felt very confident it would be a good decision for me. A couple of my girlfriends had given birth at birth centers, and they loved the experience. And my mom had given birth to me with a midwife, unmedicated, but she was at a hospital. And so I thought, my friends' births have gone smoothly. My mom's went smoothly. Mine will go smoothly as well. And I had a very uncomplicated pregnancy. I had a very joyful pregnancy. I did have one high blood pressure reading at around 28 weeks. It was 130/90. And my midwife was a little concerned. There were two midwives at this birth center. I would kind of go back and forth. And the midwife was a little concerned. My reading was like 130/90, but she said, go home, take your blood pressure. And I think it had come back down, and it was normal. I actually had really good readings during my pregnancy. Pre-pregnancy, I was like borderline hypertensive. I had readings of like 125/85. And even though I'm really young and active and cook all my own food and eat well, both my parents were diagnosed with hypertension in their 30s, and both started taking medication in their 30s. So that was something that was probably put me was like a risk factor for preeclampsia, but it was never really noted or brought up to me. Neither seemed concerned about it. As I said, I was teaching at a school during my first trimester, and a lot of the moms gave me tons of hand-me-downs. I got a car seat, I got clothes, cloth diapers, like anything I needed, they gave to me, which was so sweet. So I actually didn't even have a baby shower. And so that was really nice. I loved getting all the hand-me-downs. They just felt so special because they reminded me of my students. One thing during my pregnancy is around 20 weeks is I really stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up around midnight, and I would be up for a couple hours, and I would just kind of watch TV, eat a snack, and then eventually go back to bed. But I think doing that for months was just not very good for me. I wish I had taken something like Unisom to help me sleep throughout the night. I think during pregnancy, sleep is really important. And I just wish maybe the midwife had given me some guidance, like, it's safe to take half a Unisom to sleep. Like, it's really important that you sleep. And I was just also just so excited and feeling good. And the school year was over, so I was really focused on nesting and doing little projects like making a quilt. I made a mobile for the baby's room. I just wish maybe I had relaxed more and taken care of myself, like rested, like everyone says to do. Mm-hmm. And then around 36 weeks, my birth center, we were talking about what I had to pay, what was left remaining on my balance. And I was told there was a certain amount I was going to pay at the beginning out of pocket. And then it was like 36 weeks. And they're like, well, actually it's this amount now, which was significantly more. And that was just kind of made me feel uncomfortable. because there was no like financial agreement signed in the beginning. And I just was like, wait, you told me one thing and now it's this. And yeah, there was just a lot of back and forth. We resolved it, but I felt like, I don't know, it just kind of broke trust for me. And I'm already 36 weeks in. And later I found out at my 38-week appointment, there was another midwife joining the practice, and she was there at my appointment. And the midwife said, this is our new midwife joining our team. She might be at your birth. And I just felt also a little bit shocked that at 38 weeks, they're introducing someone new who would potentially be at my birth. And I wasn't really seeing the other midwife much at all, the original midwife I had met with. And I guess they were transitioning the business over from one partner to the other, and the original midwife was going to retire. And I just wish that had been communicated to me, because I really had signed up to work with this midwife. And yeah, I just wish there was more transparency in that whole process. So at my 38th week appointment, my blood pressure had shot up to 160 over 100, and the midwife looked very concerned, and we took it a few times and she had me rest. And each time it was pretty high. And I said, I didn't sleep well the night before. Let me just go home and rest, and I'll come back and we'll retake it. And so she said, okay, like go home, rest, and come back. But, I am kind of concerned about potential of preeclampsia. And so I went home. I called my husband. I said, I need you to come home from work. I have a bad feeling, like my blood pressure is really high. And he said, okay, I'll come home. I said, I'm going to go back to the birth center. If you could come with me for my appointment later. So he came back home, and we went to the appointment, and he was still on a work call. And I went in by myself and went to the appointment, and my blood pressure was still high. And the midwife said, she was very sweet. She said, I think you should go to the hospital. They're going to want to induce you at the hospital. And I just was so shocked, because I thought, it's my first pregnancy. I thought I was going to go late. I just was not expecting to have my baby at 38 weeks. And so we went home. We got our hospital bag together. We went to the hospital, and our midwife had called and let them know we were coming. And they had a good relationship with a high-risk OB at that hospital. And he had some midwives that he worked alongside. And I saw one of the midwives, and she was great. And she said, I recommend being induced tonight, and it's looking like you could have preeclampsia. She said, I had preeclampsia with my fourth. It's not fun. And the, remedy is to deliver the baby. So I did not expect to transfer, and I really wanted to still have my birth at the birth center. And so I said, let's just wait and see. Let's give it some time. And my blood pressure did come down to like 130 over 90, just resting there in the triage. And I said, I kind of want to go home and just see what happens. She said, and the midwife said, okay, like my advice is to stay and have the baby tonight, but you guys can, you're okay to go home. So we went home. I took a Unisom. I slept for 8 hours, which I think actually was a great call, because then I was well rested for the next day. And I woke up in the morning and my blood pressure was high again. And so I had called the birth center midwife, and I said, okay, I'm going to go into the hospital. And she let them know we were on our way. And I was just in a real rush and a panic, kind of like getting my bag together, and definitely nervous that I was about to have a baby. And my husband just said, let's just take a minute. Let's go take a shower. Let's take our time. So we really took our time getting to the hospital and just spent that morning connecting. And my husband said he wanted to, just see me pregnant one last time. And he made it a very romantic morning, which I felt helped with a smooth induction. So we got to the hospital around 12. I met the midwife that I had seen the night before, and she said, I like to get the inductions going. I'm going to give you Pitocin, and I'm going to do a Foley ball. Like, does that sound good to you? And I said, I just kind of was going to totally trust her. And I felt right away I was in good hands. She was very warm. And we started the induction, and I just was progressing really smoothly. And around maybe like 6 in the evening, I had dilated to 7 centimeters. And she was very happy with it. I think we did the Foley ball then. And yeah, it was just a really nice, smooth experience. We made my labor and delivery room really nice. We brought a diffuser and diffused lavender and orange essential oils. There were dimming lights in the room. I had brought family photos and drawings I had made during my pregnancy. There was a book that I really loved while I was pregnant called Birthing from Within. And there's some prompts to draw pictures about your birth. And yeah, so my husband made the room very relaxing, and I had a nice playlist going. And actually, one of the nurses came in and said, "Wow, it's so peaceful in here. I wish all the rooms were like this." I really felt very connected to my husband. We weren't even talking much, but we were just had our eyes closed and holding hands. And it was a very beautiful day. And they came in and checked me, and they said, I think I was at like 9 centimeters. And at one point, the midwife asked to break my water. And she said, let me know when it feels like you have to go to the bathroom. And that means you'll be ready to push. And so I felt pressure in my lower back. And just from hearing from some of my girlfriends, I remembered that meant the baby is probably sunny side up. And so I had an epidural, but I could still feel pressure. And so I let her know, I'm feeling some pressure in my back. And so, she checked and she said the baby was sunny side up. And she said, don't worry, I have a trick. She had me lay on my side with a peanut ball for like an hour or two. And the baby, got into a good position. And then I did feel a pressure in my pelvis. I could feel the baby really low, which I feel so grateful that I had an epidural, which helped bring my blood pressure down to a safe place. But I also had enough feeling that I could feel the baby dropping, and like I could feel pushing. I know some people have an epidural and it's quite strong and they can't really feel much. So I think maybe around midnight, she came and checked me and she said, okay, you're ready to push. And my husband held one leg and the nurse held another leg, and she did the coaching. She coached me to push. And I had, read a lot about hypnobirthing and, trying not to push your baby and letting the baby kind of come out with the fetal ejection reflex. I had heard things like, don't do the coach pushing, but that's what we ended up doing. And it worked. And I had a good experience with pushing. Someone had told me, when I was in the hospital, I focused on one thing while I pushed. And so I focused on a drawing that I had made that my husband had hung on the wall. And it was a drawing of a door opening. And so I just focused on that drawing while I was pushing. And I got very internal and focused. I don't think I made a peep the entire time I was pushing. I was just very focused. And my midwife, was like, oh my goodness, he has so much hair. And that just made me so emotional because I had pictured our son with a lot of hair because I was born with a lot of hair and so was my husband. And I just knew, I was like, this baby's going to come out with some dark, beautiful hair. Yeah. And then I pushed and he came out. I pushed for 30 minutes and the midwife put him on my tummy and he had a very gentle cry. His first response was to grab my finger. And that was just so sweet. I felt like he recognized me and I recognized him right away. And I had a short cord, so he couldn't quite go on my chest. He was on my tummy. And the midwife knew I wanted to do a delayed cord clamping. And she said, okay, it's been about 5-6 minutes, but you're having some bleeding. So I would like to take the placenta out. And she, started that process. I think at some point Eric took the baby, and that's when things started to go sideways. And I could see the midwife was concerned and I was having a lot of bleeding. And she gave me Pitocin and was trying to, make sure there was no retained placenta. And yeah, I was just having a lot of bleeding and I could see people moving quickly. The baby's nurse came over and collected colostrum from me. And so I didn't get it like to nurse the baby right away. But there was a lovely nurse who collected colostrum, and then her and my husband fed the baby. She also brought me they call it like a mommy cocktail. It was ginger ale and cranberry juice. And it was like the best thing I've ever had in my life. And he said, don't drink it too fast. Like you might get sick. We gave you a lot of medication. And of course I did get sick because I was drinking it so fast, and I got sick on one of the nurses, and they were just, trying to get the bleeding under control. I was very panicked. My pulse was 160. And so they brought someone in to do an EKG, and that was all fine. I think I was just very scared about what was going on. Finally, they got the bleeding to stop with a Jada ball. And, my husband was tending to the baby. At this point, it was like probably 4:00 in the morning. And I went to stand up. 2 nurses helped me stand up to go to the postpartum room. And I felt so faint. I just almost fell back. And it was from all the blood loss. So they helped me slowly get up. We did make it to the postpartum room, but I just felt really, really weak. We also hadn't slept. And so we get to the postpartum room, and then all these people are coming in. There's a lactation consultant, and I just am so tired and I'm so out of it. And I couldn't really take in any information. So we ended up sleeping for a few hours, and that was like some of the best sleep of my life. And I had a great postpartum nurse. She was so sweet. She took great care of us. The nurses really helped me with the baby's latch and nursing. And I asked a lot of questions. I was like, can you show me one more time? It took me a minute to get the hang of it. And I was so grateful that I had such wonderful nurses who, showed me how to breastfeed. It was amazing. And our postpartum nurse, she said she would be working Christmas Eve, and she was knitting some Christmas beanies for the babies. And she gave us one of her little prototypes. So that was something we saved because I love it so much. It's just like a little knitted Christmas hat.
Oh, so cute.
It was so cute. And I just couldn't get over the nurses, how wonderful they were.
Mm.
And I know some people don't have a great experience in the hospital, but we had a wonderful experience. I loved the hospital midwife. I loved the nurses. I felt so cared for. I actually didn't want to leave the hospital. My husband was anxious to get home. And I was like, but we have so much help. So we got discharged, went home, and we were driving home. And as we're turning down our street, I see my best friend, her car, because she had just dropped off some food and she was leaving our house, and we were pulling in. And so we pulled over, and she saw the baby, and it was sweet because she was like the first person to see the baby. My family didn't come to the hospital. I said, we'll just meet you at the house. You guys can come over. And she saw the baby, and that was so sweet. And she made me a great chicken soup and an egg casserole. And I just think if you can have support postpartum, I'm so glad that I set myself up with. My grandmother was there at the house to help us for the first 2 weeks. My friend brought me food. I think postpartum is just a really important part to focus on. And for me, it was the more difficult part was the postpartum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into that postpartum.
Yeah. So I was home for 3 days, and I was just not feeling myself. I actually was recommended at the hospital to get a blood transfusion. And I just think I'd been through so much. I just was like, I don't want to do anything else, and they said I'd lost a lot of blood, and they recommended a blood transfusion. So I declined it. Instead, I did an iron infusion, and I thought, okay, I'll eat some iron-rich foods. I'll take an iron supplement. But when I got home, I just was feeling very weak. I was actually doing this thing where if I would get up to move, let's say go to the bathroom or something, I would chatter. It was almost like I was like a little scared dog. The nurses at the hospital kept asking, what was going on? And I think it was just my body was just in shock. I think it was maybe my nervous system or something, but I was chattering, and I think my body just felt unsafe. So I was feeling off, but it was hard for me to tell if that was just from giving birth or something else was going on. And my original midwife came over to do a home visit, and my blood pressure was high again. It had stabilized after birth. It was totally normal postpartum in the hospital. And it had shot up again to like 160. And she prescribed me some labetalol. She said, take this. It was a low dose, and take your blood pressure and keep me posted. I was feeling like something was off. So I told my husband, I'm going to go back to the hospital tomorrow and I'm going to get the transfusion. I think I need it. And I texted the midwife and she said, I think that's a great idea. And so I went back. My grandma drove me to triage, and Eric, my husband, stayed home with the baby. And when I got in there, they took my blood pressure. And for some reason, I just had brushed off that my blood pressure was like high. I don't know. I think I was in denial, but it was like 170 over 110. And I was like, I'm just nervous. And they started acting fast. And I had heard about preeclampsia, but I actually kind of avoided listening to birth stories with complications. I think I had read in a book, only listen to positive birth stories. Like, imagine your perfect birth story. But I kind of wish I had listened to other people's experiences that weren't straightforward, because that is a reality for a lot of people. And I don't think you can manifest your perfect birth. I think the baby is going to come how they want to. And I think someone once told me that having a birth, it's like the first experience of, loss of control. And I think we don't have a lot of control about how they come into this world. And so I had heard about preeclampsia, but I kind of avoided really knowing much more about it. And yeah, the nurse looked concerned and she rushed me in, and they started giving me a labetalol IV, and they started wrapping pillows around the side of the hospital bed. She said, I'm doing this just in case you have a seizure. And that was so scary to hear that. So they admitted me, and my grandma was there, and we called my husband and said, you're going to have to come to the hospital with the baby. I am going to be admitted for at least 48 hours. And they put me on the magnesium drip, which I'm sure some people are familiar with. It feels like you have a flu and you just kind of feel like you're underwater. But I was so grateful because they let Eric come and they let the baby come. And my milk was also coming in that day. So it was just a lot going on, that feeling when your milk's coming in and you're full. But I couldn't breastfeed because I'm on magnesium. And so I think the nurse might maybe help me pump. I'm not sure. But the baby definitely got formula while we were in the hospital. And everyone's just telling you to rest. Everyone's just saying, just rest. But it's really hard to rest when your blood pressure is so high. You don't feel relaxed.
Right.
Yeah. So did the magnesium. After I came off the magnesium, my husband was like, don't worry, it's okay if the baby gets formula. I'll take care of him. And I was so grateful because he's trying to be helpful. But the nurse said, let her nurse. It's actually good for her and the baby. They both have been through a lot. And I just appreciated that so much, because that was going to be the best thing for me and the baby, was to be together again and to be able to nurse and feel like I got some normalcy in that experience. So I was in the hospital, and they were trying to figure out my medication to manage my blood pressure, which can take some time. And I wasn't really responding to the first medication they gave me. And so they tried a second medication, nifedipine. And yeah, I was like, am I going to be here for a week? There were so many unknowns. At one point, my husband left to get us some food. He got us some Mediterranean food, and I'm just laying in the bed, and he comes back, and we're eating dinner, and we're watching The Office and holding the baby. And it just was such a sweet moment. It was kind of a reprieve from all the craziness we had just been through. And I was really starting to feel stir crazy because I'd been in the hospital for a couple of days. And then a couple of days before that, I was in the hospital for 48 hours. And so I asked the nurse, I said, is there any way you could bring me a wheelchair? And so we can just kind of get out of the room. And she brought us a wheelchair, and it was like 10 at night. And I woke my husband up and I asked him if he would wheel me around the hospital. So, he put me in the wheelchair and I held the baby, and we just had this like little funny adventure at 10 p.m. in the hospital. And it's really quiet. And we go out to, there's like a meditation garden, and everything's quiet and closed, but it just felt like our little family was on our first little adventure. So we leave the hospital, and they managed to, somewhat control my blood pressure with 2 medications, labetalol and nifedipine. And I went home, and my grandmother was there to help us. And I think I had another spike in my blood pressure a couple days after being home, really high again. And we talked to a friend who was a family friend who was a nephrologist, because we couldn't get a hold of the OB or something like that. It was around the holidays, so it was like Thanksgiving. And so he said, just, maybe just up your nifedipine. So we did, and it controlled it a bit better. And then at my 2-week visit, I got the okay to come down on my medication. Then I just assumed, okay, I'll just stop taking the medication at 6 weeks, like I've read you do, and everything will be fine. And I didn't go to my 6-week appointment. I think I was just tired with the baby. And I also had been following up with my original midwife. So I was going to like double amount of appointments. And so I was like, oh, I don't need it. I'll just stop taking the medication. Well, that was like not a good idea, because then I had a hypertensive rebound. And that's where if you come off of this medication too quickly, your blood pressure goes up and your heart rate goes up like crazy. My resting heart rate was like 100, 120. And then I tried to go back on my dose, and I just was having a hard time controlling it. And at the time, because we were fairly new to Phoenix, I didn't have a primary care physician. And I really recommend having like established care with a primary before giving birth, just so if someone does need to see you after 6 weeks, you have that relationship. Because I had to find a new doctor, and luckily I found a great internist, and he helped me manage my medication. I had to go back on a heavy dose of nifedipine, which was really upsetting, because I was like, everyone else, takes this medication for a few weeks and then they're back to themselves. And so I just thought, like, am I just going to have hypertension now? Because that does happen to some women with preeclampsia. Yeah, I was on medication for 9 months. Finally, I stopped breastfeeding around 6 months postpartum, because after everything I'd been through, I was dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression. And I think around 3 months postpartum, I just stopped sleeping. And my son was always a great sleeper, but I just was so on edge, and I just did not feel safe in my body after everything I'd been through with the induction and the preeclampsia, and then the rebound hypertension and the blood transfusion, just everything I'd been through. I just did not feel safe in my body, and I was just hypervigilant. And stopped sleeping, that I think was the first sign that something was off. And I really wasn't eating enough food. So the breastfeeding was really depleting me. So I decided at 6 months to stop breastfeeding, to see if that kind of helped level things out. And it did. About like 2 weeks after I stopped breastfeeding, I started to feel a bit better. And I did get on, I think around 3 or 4 months postpartum, I did get on Lexapro, and that helped a little bit. I had to keep increasing my dose because it would help. And then I would kind of feel like I would backtrack. So it was just very up and down for several months with the postpartum depression. And that is just a really hard experience when you're caring for a baby. And I just feel if you have stuff that you've been through, having a baby for me brought up a lot of stuff from my childhood. Yeah. And I think just the love you feel for your child and the responsibility you feel, it just cracks you open. And I remember I would just cry to my husband and I would say, I just love him so much. It hurts. And yeah, I think it was, thank goodness for my husband, because he really stepped in. He took over nights around 3 months when I wasn't sleeping well. And, I tried everything. I did a weighted blanket. I did an eye mask. I did melatonin. I did Unisom, you name it. I tried it all to try to sleep. And I think slowly but surely, as I started, my body started regulating. I started sleeping again and started eating better. And what really, really helped me postpartum, and it's just, a tale as old as time, but exercise really helped me. I was doing Orange Theory classes and running, helped me just feel normal for a couple hours. And then I signed up at a gym where there was a daycare and I could take the baby for an hour or two at the daycare, and I would meet a friend there and we'd work out. And so I got really into exercise, and I ended up starting tennis lessons at my gym, and just to find something for myself again, to remember who I was or who this new version of myself was. I think that was very important. And yeah, I'm so thankful that I'm healthy and that the baby's healthy, and I've come off all my medication. And I'm still on Lexapro, a low dose of Lexapro, but I just feel so grateful for our health. And I think now my baby's about to be 1 in a couple weeks, and I can finally just feel the simple joy of motherhood and the mundane and hard parts of like not sleeping, or, he gets sick and then I get sick. It's just, it's even hard to complain about those things, because where we were to where we are now, it's just so much easier and so much more joy. And I'm just so glad that I'm feeling better and that I can really enjoy him, because he's such a good boy.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm glad that it's gotten better, and I appreciate you sharing all those experiences, because I know there's people out there relating for sure.
Yes. And I just think having that support postpartum, whether it's your partner or family or friends, do it all. Do the mom group, read the book, go to the gym. I just think it's such a tender time for new moms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, what resources do you want to share?
Yeah, I would love to share. So Birthing from Within, I think that's a great book. I think it's a great book if you're a creative person, because there's some fun prompts to make drawings or poems. And I really enjoyed that book. And I just recently watched a Netflix special, Ali Wong, Hard Knock Wife. And it's about postpartum. And I think if you just need a laugh about postpartum and feel seen, I think that is a really funny thing. It just was, I really enjoyed it. And I'll also share with you all my birthing playlist that I listened to. I loved it so much. I didn't make it. Someone else made it, and I just used their playlist, but I'll share it because I thought it was a great one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes. And then what's the best way for people to connect with you?
You can find me on Instagram. My name is @Justine__RIVAS.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for sharing, Justine.
Thank you for having me.
Now I'm going to talk to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and all of the great products from Needed. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat with me about Needed again.
Brand, I'm so excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of the new things happening over at Needed, can you just share with my listeners a little bit about who you are and your role at Needed?
Absolutely. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Needed.
All right. So I recommend Needed to my listeners, my followers on Instagram all the time. I've been using the products for over a year now. And I just really love that with your perinatal products, you really go beyond the bare minimum. And it's just really important, especially for the people in my audience, because we know that during the stages of life where you're growing babies and feeding babies are especially nutritionally demanding. So I love that you guys are addressing these nutrient deficiencies and talking about now that not all prenatal vitamins are created equally. And on that note, your team just released the results of an IRB study highlighting these differences between standard prenatal vitamins versus Needed. Can you just talk a little bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. This has been a baby of mine for a while.
Yeah.
But basically, there is overwhelming evidence that proper nutrient levels can improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life for both mother and baby thereafter. Yet, as we all know, despite our little kind of communities, nutrition has not been front and center in the perinatal standard of care. And most prenatals on the market provide bare minimum nutrition support. We're designing and conducting studies to add to the clinical literature to unequivocally prove that women deserve more support, resources, and radically better nutritional care. We really just fundamentally think the evidence just cannot be ignored anymore, as the lack of nutritional support is really failing women and children. So our goal for this study specifically was to take a more comprehensive look at nutritional status in pregnancy. The study compared nutritional characteristics between women taking the needed prenatal multi and a standard prenatal vitamin.
Okay.
We collected survey data and analyzed nutrient biomarkers, so nutrient levels actually in the blood themselves, in a diverse group of 235 adult pregnant women across 7 U.S. states. And what's really exciting, and what you're hinting towards, is that the results actually revealed quite striking insights into how maternal nutrition status differs by the type of prenatal vitamin a woman is taking during pregnancy. Specifically, we found that women taking the needed prenatal multi had higher blood levels of key nutrients for pregnancy, including vitamin D, B6, selenium, and zinc, among a number of others. When we compared prenatal subgroups, we found that only the group of women taking the needed multi had sufficient blood levels of vitamin D and vitamin B6 compared to the group taking the standard prenatal. And nutrients like vitamin D and B6 play key roles in pregnancy in supporting both maternal and baby health outcomes. So it's really exciting, and it's also important to reiterate that our study was diverse and the prenatal groups were comparable on several key factors outside of their prenatal vitamins. This is really important for the rigor of the study. So for example, 1/3 of the women in each group identified as a race ethnicity other than white, and women in both groups were in similar stages of their pregnancy.
Okay, and what does the IRB part mean?
The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they're basically a committee that reviews clinical research involving human subjects to ensure that certain ethical standards are met.
Okay, it's super important when studying pregnant women.
Super important when studying pregnant women, and in terms of showing proper kind of rigor and study design went into the methodology of how we conducted the research as well.
Right. So one thing that I thought was interesting is that a lot of this past studies weren't even done on pregnant women or even women. Oftentimes it was like based on white men as far as vitamin levels and things like that. So as you mentioned, these are really striking results. And what does this really mean for women in the trying to conceive or pregnancy or postpartum season of life? Like, what should we be taking away from this data?
You're right that sort of there is a lot of missing gaps in the research, though we also have found that there is a lot of really good research emphasizing the need for better nutrition at this stage of life. But overall, we see this study as adding to the growing body of evidence showing that, one, meeting nutritional needs through diet alone is very challenging in modern context. So supplementation is needed. Two, that most pregnant women in the U.S. fail to meet dietary recommendations for certain key nutrients that are very important for pregnancy, like vitamin D. And third, I think increased evidence that standard prenatals are really falling short in closing the gap between nutritional needs and dietary intake. And overall, we hope this study leads to more clinicians and moms advocating for the nutrition that is needed for a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah, and I've been sharing about this with my followers on Instagram from some of the data you guys are talking about. And one thing I thought was really interesting was the statistic about how few care providers are discussing nutrition with pregnant and postpartum women at all.
Yeah, that is absolutely striking. We found that nearly 80% of women reported receiving little to no nutritional advice from their OBGYN during their pregnancy care.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up on the podcast a lot because I feel like people really notice a difference when they have midwifery care versus OBGYNs, because nutrition is something that's talked about in these much longer prenatal appointments and things like that. So yeah, it's a big part of feeling good throughout pregnancy. And I know that one thing that Needed really focuses on as well is that it's not just during pregnancy, but also postpartum. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
We equate it in a lot of ways to nutritional depletion, and that a lot of the importance for this life stage is in avoiding depletion. So meaning when your body lacks the essential vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients that are really needed for optimal function. And depletion is not something that occurs only through pregnancy, but women are more vulnerable in critical life stages such as pregnancy and breastfeeding. So that postpartum stage that you mentioned right there. And a lot of the problem is that women go into pregnancy already depleted and then increase their depletion in growing baby, so end up in a pretty tough spot postpartum. Mm-hmm. There are many contributors to this depletion, from nutrient deficient soil and stress. And then the signs of depletion like brittle nails, fatigue, headaches, mood changes, thinning hair, constipation, dry skin, all sound pretty familiar to us, right? Mm-hmm. And really research suggests that up to 95% of women experience nutritional depletion even when they are on a prenatal vitamin.
Oh my gosh.
Depletion is, I think, a much bigger problem than we actually, have historically given it credit. And a lot of us, women just assume we have to feel these things, these signs of depletion, just as part of our, that's just the status quo. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think a lot of our sort of emphasis is showing that no, radically better is possible. There are ways to better support ourselves through nutrition to minimize those signs of depletion.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to someone recording their birth story, and they were saying how, they were super focused on their nutrition during pregnancy, and then it kind of fell to the wayside postpartum. And it's like especially if you're breastfeeding, it's taking a lot of energy and nutrients, and then you're also sleep deprived because you have a new baby. So the depletion, I think, like you mentioned, is just something we really need to focus on beyond pregnancy.
Yeah, and most care providers aren't really reminding folks. They think of it as like a prenatal, not a perinatal.
Right.
There are some postnatals that exist, but I think the use of them in that breastfeeding life stage that is actually more nutritionally intensive than pregnancy is a non-supported part of this life stage. And, where we see so many women really talking about that postpartum period being the most difficult. And I think being able to advocate and raise awareness to better support and how do we care for mom, not just care for baby during that stage is very important.
Yes, I'm just nodding along to everything over here. So are there any other supplements that women should consider outside of a prenatal to help fight depletion?
Absolutely. So most prenatals and aren't included are vitamin and mineral blends. And there are many other nutrients that are supportive of combating nutrition. Unfortunately, we just don't think that there's a single product that can fully get you over the hill on depletion lack. So it needed what we are really focused on rather than just a single product, though we do hero our prenatal multi a lot, but really an emphasis on a system of products is most supportive. And for example, we do offer an omega-3 DHA EPA add-on. So DHA omega is often something that you probably do hear as part of taking that alongside your prenatal. And DHA and EPA are very supportive of a healthy pregnancy. Sometimes they are combined with a prenatal multi, but we often see that can lead to kind of lack of nutrient integrity or too low of doses. So we do think it is important to offer it as a separate product for that reason, but do advocate for that being added on to your system of products. And then there's a whole host of other products depending on needs. I personally really love our sleep support, as lack of sleep is a big contributor to depletion. And I also really love our breastfeeding safe cognitive support product. It's a product that really helps me sort of feel like me and try to do it all by being a working mom while still, breastfeeding and chasing after my kids. Being able to focus when I need to focus is a critical part of that.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of that one as well. So you guys offer several bundles and things like that with these add-ons. Where's the best place for people to start if they're trying to decide what's right for them?
Our website does help to guide you by sort of life stage or need, which is thisisneeded.com, or we're at Needed on Instagram. And we actually have a team of trained nutritionists and doulas as part of our customer support team. So they're eager and ready to help if you do want to sort of DM us or email us if you kind of get stuck on the website your own. So that's a great place to start. And then I'd also really recommend folks to go to thisisneeded.com/thrive to learn more about the prenatal study and the rigor that went into it, and a lot more results beyond what we're able to share today.
Yes, it's so fascinating. And I'm the same way. Like, I can't squeeze it all in to share on Instagram either. And so I'm like, please go check it out, because it really is amazing what you guys were able to find out from this study. And I love that people are available in the DMs to help guide, because I feel like it can be really overwhelming when choosing your prenatal. And starting with the main prenatal is obviously a great choice, but I know lots of people want to take advantage of these bundles too. So that's great to know that it's available to DM or email.
Yeah, I think we're here to help, and it's really a passion of a lot of members of the team to do so. So we're excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for chatting with me about all of this. It's always great to hear what you guys are up to, and I'm always happy to share with my listeners about Needed.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much again to Justine for sharing her story with us, and to Needed for sponsoring this episode. Remember to use the coupon BIRTHHOUR at thisisneeded.com on your first purchase to save up to 40% off on those bundles. And if you want more information from today's episode, you can head over to thebirthhour.com and just search for Justine's name in the search bar to find her show notes page. I'll put a link to Needed on the show notes, as well as in the podcast app where you're listening to this episode as well. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.